So I put in the chat that you should have two tabs open on your browser. The first is this sort of command line Python on a website. I think you saw something like this morning that Sam was doing. I didn't catch exactly what he was doing, but then also a playground. And I assume that you have access to a Docassemble server. If you don't, you can talk to Quentin in the chat and he can hook you up with one. You can follow along with me as I do stuff in the playground. So let me share my screen and show you the first site that I linked to, which is this Python interpreter. When it starts out on your screen, it looks something like this, but you can make this command line area bigger. So if you remember computers from the 80s, when you turn them on, you would be able to use BASIC. And unfortunately, that seemed to go away. But you can do something like this with one of these Python interpreters that are on the web. Or if you use a Mac, I think you can open up the terminal and then type Python. But anyway, you can do stuff, write very simple Python and get immediate feedback about stuff. So let me define a variable b equals 4 and a equals 2. And then I can do simple things like what is a plus b? Well, it's 6. Python also lets you define lists of things, like lists of strings or pieces of text in a list. So if you just refer to what fruits is, well, it's not just one thing, it's multiple things. And if I do vegetables, I could have a list with just one item in it called turnip, and I could do fruits plus vegetables. So those are the 3 things that I'll be having for dinner tonight. You can also loop through a list, and a list is just something that has those brackets around it. That's how Python refers to things. With what's called a for loop. So you could type for fruit in fruits, and it does that 3 dots thing, but just sort of ignore that, and then you can do print fruit, and then press enter again. So what's that doing? What that is doing is it's saying for each fruit that is in the list of fruits, I want to do some operation on them. And in this case, I'm just printing out the name. So it is printing apple and orange. But I could do anything else with code within that for loop. And so for loops are all over Docassemble. You can write them when you're writing questions. You can say, your children are, : and then do a for loop for child in children. And then you can include the names of the children or their ages. When you're preparing a Word document, you could have a Word table where you have a for loop that has 1 row per child, for example, and lists information about each child in the columns. But there are things you can do with fruits. Like if I wanted to add a item to fruits, I could do fruits append banana. And now I look at what fruits is, and I've added banana to the end. There's also a function that I guess people don't use too much, but you can do fruits.pop, and that pops an item off of the list and then makes it shorter. And so it takes an item off the end of the list. You can get the length of a list by using the len function. Like if you want to know how many fruits are there, it's just 2. So that's lists. And Jonathan, by the way,
can I ask a question?
I was about to say, feel free to ask questions. Yes.
So my question is, up in the middle, you did fruits plus vegetables, and it returned apple, orange, and turnip. But when you did the for loop, it only printed apple and orange. Why is that?
When I typed fruits plus vegetables, it did not change the contents of fruits. What it did was it's just a Python expression that returns the combination of them. So if I wanted to type dinner equals fruits plus vegetables, then dinner would now be apple, orange, turnip, but fruits and vegetables still have the same items. There's also something you could do where you could do a plus equals to 5 or something. So a used to be 2, and then that's a shorthand for a equals a plus 5. So there are things you can do there. Any other questions? So that's what lists are. You can also you can start a list that's empty by doing just the square brackets, and that's an empty list. And when you add an empty list to a list, it doesn't change that list at all. There's also you also sometimes see it written that way. It's kind of the same thing. List is kind of like a function. Then there's this other data type in Python that is used a lot, which is called a dictionary, which is kind of like a lookup table. So whereas a list is sort of known by it's one item after another. A dictionary is kind of an unordered list of things that correspond to other things. So so if I want to do a list of or a dictionary of my favorite foods, I could say my favorite fruit is apple and my favorite vegetable is turnip. Got to remember to put quotes around things. And so if I want to know my favorite fruit, I do favorites with fruit in the square brackets. And I actually just remembered that I forgot to tell you about the corresponding way to do this with a list. So going back to our fruits list, if I type fruits with bracket 0, that returns the first item in the list. Fruits are indexed by an index number, which starts at 0. In other languages, it starts at 1, but in Python, it starts at 0. And if I do fruits 1, that will return the second item. And if I do fruits 2, it'll give me an error. It'll say list index out of range. So if you wanted to refer to a particular item in a list, you would use a bracket with a number. And if you wanted to refer to an item in a dictionary, you would do brackets with some piece of text. So favorites is that. I can run various operations on favorites, like favorites dot keys. That will return that's a kind of a weird format thing that Python uses, but what it's really just doing is returning the like the words in the dictionary, so to speak. Whereas favorites.values returns the definitions in the dictionary, where like fruit is a word and apple is its definition. That's the analogy for a dictionary in Python. And I think you'll probably use lists much more often than dictionaries, but dictionaries can be really helpful if you're gathering a bunch of related things. Like if you are asking somebody about how much what assets they have, you could make assets a dictionary, and you could have the keys or the words in the dictionary be checking account, savings account, CDs, automobiles, and then the values would be something like the dollar value. And that can really simplify the way that you gather information. The reason it makes sense to go into gathering lists in Python using these built-in Python data types like lists and dictionaries is that it gets pretty tiresome to do things like fruits1 equals apple, where it's and fruits2 equals peach. You know, you could do that. You could store all your variables with just something that has a name, but how do you write a for loop over fruits1 and fruits2? How do you know what to do if there might be zero fruits that are important, or there could be 10, or there could be 5? It's just kind of cumbersome to just give things names like fruits1 and fruits2. So that's why it makes more sense to use these items that can be indexed, like fruits1 for the second item. Anybody have any questions about dictionaries and lists and how they work in Python?
Jonathan, I have a question. This is Michael. So with your dictionary there, of course, if you have a favorite, it would be one item, but are you able to have fruit, colon, and then more than one item?
Yes, and you can go nuts in doing what's called nesting these things. Like I could mix all of these types together. So okay. Here I'm saying favorites is a dictionary, and favorites for fruits is a list. And so I could refer to favorites fruits 0. That's my first favorite fruit. And my second favorite fruit is favorites fruits 1. And so I could go nuts, and I could develop these data structures that have a dictionary of a list of dictionaries of a list. And so it can get pretty complicated. But that is the power of being able to use a general purpose programming language like Python to store information about a user's answers in an interview.
Excellent.
Any other
that might be worth just like highlighting there is if you find yourself making really complicated nested structures of lists and dictionaries, you might be ready to use an object to represent your data instead, which is like a much more structured type of way to store that complex nested information.
Any other questions? All right, I'm going to move on to the playground. If you go into your playground, you might see an interview already there. By default, there's a test interview, but let's add a new one called like fun.yaml. And let's do some of the same stuff that we were doing before, because TalkSimple is based on Python, so we can write Python here. So let's write fruits equals apple, orange, peach. So in DocSimple, you can write Python code just by using a code block. So I'm declaring that fruits is a list, and then I can have some mandatory question. If you're there this morning, you'll learn about making questions mandatory. My favorite fruits. And you can write in the sub question, you can use this Mako expression, $ squiggle bracket. Let's see what that does. So very, very simple one question interview that refers to the list called fruits. I'm going to press save on that. And then save and run. And so it says, my favorite fruits, apple, orange, peach. Now it's formatting them in a kind of weird way. So I'll show you how you can make that a little bit more user-friendly. You can write a for loop. As I was mentioning before, you can type for fruit in fruits. And so what this means is that within, between the for and the end for, there will be a new variable called fruit without an S that will stand in for whatever the item in the list is. Now, end for is not something you see in Python, because Python typically just uses indentation to control when a for loop begins and ends. But in the context of a question, when you're using this Mako templating, or in a Word document when you're using the Jinja templating language, which is very similar, you need to explicitly say when the for loop ends. So I can save and run this, and now it will say apple, orange, peach. And I actually like to format this using Markdown. And in Markdown, you can create a bullet point list by using the asterisks. So you can do a for loop with an asterisk in it, and then it'll put it in a nice bulleted format. And by the way, if you are writing those Markdown bullets, it's always good to leave a space before the list and after the list. Otherwise, it can like merge stuff together, and you wonder, why isn't it listening to my asterisks? So I'm gonna write I like colon, and then the asterisk list, and it will now do I like apple, orange, peach. So as you can see, Docassemble allows you to refer to things that are lists in Python. However, the typical case is that you'll want to gather that list from the user rather than just define it beforehand. So you can do that by using an object in Docassemble called a DA list, short for Docassemble list. And in order to declare that something is an object, you write an objects block, which is just the word objects colon, and then a list of objects. And I'm gonna say I want fruits to be a DA list. So I'm just declaring that fruits is a name, it's a variable, and it is an object of type DA list. And let's see what happens. We can save it. And I can see right here that the interview has an error. There was a reference to a variable, fruits, there are any, that could not be looked up in the question file. And that's true. There is no such question that defines fruits dot there are any. So the first thing to think about when you're working with lists is don't be upset when you see an error message. And I think we covered this morning. Error messages are your friends. They will give you a hint about what to do next. And eventually you'll be able to write code that doesn't raise error messages, but they're not a bad thing. So what it's suggesting is that however the way Docassemble works, it thinks there should be a block in the interview that defines fruits that there are any. And I'll tell you what that means. It wants to know whether the list is empty or not, because it's not going to ask the user, like, tell me the first item in the list, tell me the second item in the list. If the user says, no, the list doesn't have any items, like I hate fruit, I don't have any favorite fruits. So that's something that we can write a question block to define. So let's see, do you like any fruits? And you can write whatever question you want for whatever list that you want to work on. Like, do you like any breeds of dog? And let's make that a yes/no question, because that's what there are any is. It just wants to know yes or no. Are there any fruits in the list? Let's try running this now. So, do you like any fruits? So I say yes, I do. And then it says, oh, interview has an error. There was a reference to a variable fruits 0 that could not be looked up. So you'll recall from over here that fruits 0 is the first item in the list. So it wants a question that defines fruit 0. So we can write that here. What fruit do you like? And then we can use a list of fields, and the first field and the only field is called fruit. And we can use the variable name fruits 0, which we got from the error message. And then let's see if that makes the system happy when I run this. Yes, I do. Well, what fruit do you like? I like apples. Okay, so now there's an error, and it's an error we haven't seen before. It's now asking for a block that defines fruit. There is another. And so what this means is that it wants to know whether there is yet another fruit to add to the list after we've already added one. So let's add a question that asks the user, is there another? Any more? And make it a yes, no. Fruits, there is another. All right. So now let's see if it's happy. Do I like any fruits? Yes, I do. I like apples. Any more? Yes. Oh, and now it's asking for fruits 1. Now I could go into the YAML, and I could write a question that answers the defines the variable fruits 1. But this is going to get tiresome. I don't want to. Maybe some user likes 100 fruits. I don't want to create 100 questions in my YAML file for every single fruit that the person might like. So here's the cool thing that Docassemble lets you do. It allows you to generalize this question, and you replace 0, the first item, with the general variable I. Now this is a special variable in Docassemble. You shouldn't use I as a variable name anywhere else, but in this context. So as I talked about during the advanced training, when Docassemble looks for a question block or a code block that defines a certain variable, it will first try the literal variable name. But if it can't find something that defines the literal variable name, it starts to generalize that variable. And the way you generalize an item in a list is by using the index variable I, which is not something you have to worry about defining yourself. Docassemble will define it for you. So I'm saying that in general, this is how you ask for an item in the list. And let's see how this runs. Do I like any fruits? Yeah, I like apple. Any more? Yeah, I like orange. Any more? Peach. So it keeps asking me more and more and more. So I'm tired of answering fruit. So now it's not generating any errors anymore. Yay! Because I was getting lots of errors. So now it has fully gathered the list of apple, orange, peach, and it has done so by just repeatedly asking these questions. It asked me this more than once, and it asked me this more than once. So it's important that you define these to just be general questions. A mistake that a lot of new people make is they try to tag mandatory true onto this stuff. That's really just going to confuse the system. So don't use mandatory true on anything that relates to list gathering. Just let Docassemble find the YAML blocks that define the necessary things, and it might use them more than once. So any questions so far?
Hey, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had one. I was just wondering, on the last page, what is the best practice for if we decide that they do not like fruit, but would you have the program go to a different page to say, oh, you don't like any fruit, your loss? Or is there a way to change that question? Can you do a conditional check to see the length of the DA list or whatever it is to see, so you decide which message to put? What's the best way to handle that situation?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a best way. There are just a number of ways. So here's one way to do it. I can wrap everything in an if statement that is ended with end if. So if the length of fruits is 0, then I'll say, what is wrong with you? Otherwise, I will say, I'll show the list of fruits. So if I say, do I like any fruits? No. It'll say, what is wrong with you? So yeah, that's a good question. Now, there's also a way to do it. Instead of using len, which is a Python function, you can do fruits.number. And it's basically the same thing. But this is a Docassemble addition. It's not something that's built into Python.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? That's a good question.
Jonathan, is there any reason that you would do length versus number? Whether you'd use the Python versus docassemble there or anywhere? I mean,
I would only worry about readability. I think I wrote the number because I thought that was a little bit more readable, and I thought len was kind of like an esoteric Python thing, and I wanted to sort of keep it
kind of a codey thing instead of trying to get more people. Yeah.
Because my idea with docassemble is I want attorneys to be able to at least read YAML and be able to discern what's going on and not just be turned off by a bunch of gobbledygook. So I thought maybe fruits.number would be something that they could read even if they couldn't remember the syntax. And there's also a similar function called number as word, where you can write, I like fruits. So if I say I like apple, and I also like banana, and I like 2 fruits. So it's pretty similar to the number method, but it's number as word.
Amani had a question on the chat. Her question is whether you can ask for the number of items up front and that rather than asking question by question.
I'm going to get to that in a minute, and the answer is yes. So here's another thing that you can do. Were there any other questions that people want to ask? All right, another thing you can do is list collect true on this fruits I, the question that asked about the item. Do I like any fruits? Yeah, I do. So I like apple, I like orange, and I like peach. So you can, just by making that one change, by adding list collect true, you can gather them all on one page. So it's just a matter of what you like best. Now you can also set some options for a object that you define, like a DA list. And the way that you define options for an object is when you declare it in your objects block, you tag on .using, and this is, I had to do this because of Python. This is kind of how, the only way I could get it to work in Python. I want to define fruits as a DA list using ask number equals true. So what happens when I run this? When I am basically answering Amani's question now. It says there was an error. There was a reference to the variable fruits.targetNumber that cannot be looked up. So, all right, that's fine. Let me add a question that, and it doesn't matter where you add these questions. You can add them anywhere you want. Question, how many fruits do you like? Let's do a fields and a number. So copy and paste that variable name that it wanted. And let's set the data type to integer, which is a type of number. It's a whole number. So that will give, that will set fruits.targetNumber to a whole number. No, I'm not going to use a float, Michelle. Floating point number. I think that might not work, actually. All right, so let's run this one. How many fruits do you like? I like 2. All right, what fruit do I like? Apple. What fruit do I like? It's kind of weird here that it's asking the exact same question again, but it did gather 2 items based on Amani's favorite way of asking the question. Here's what you can do to make that question a little bit more readable. You can ask, what is the, and use a Mako expression, ordinal the function ordinal I fruit you like. So if you don't know, the ordinal numbers are first, second, third, etc. And it is taking I, and it starts out at 0, but it converts that to first, and 1 is converted to second. It does work in languages other than English. So I like 2 fruits. What is the first fruit? Apple. What is the second fruit? Peach. So that's how you can do it Amani's way. Now there's also something you can do where you can say minimum number equals 3. And then it'll say, what is the first fruit you like? It won't ask me whether I like any because it wants a minimum number of 3. So I'll say apple, banana, peach. But now it's asking me, oh, any more? Because I could add more if I want to. So I'll say I like pear. Any more? No. So minimum of 3, but I added 4. All right, any questions so far?
Can you I don't know if this is taking off the tangent. My favorite thing to do is to, when you ask the number, say for children, start with oldest. So if the first, so basically the first time you ask it, like what's your most favorite fruit? And then your second most favorite, and your so that you have an if statement in the first question. I think that's really helpful for people.
So you can do stuff like that by doing conditional statements that use the index variable I. If I equals 0, the first item, what is the greatest fruit? Of all time. So the first time it asks it, it says, what is the greatest fruit of all time? And then the second time it goes back to the normal way. And so there's a bunch of things you could do there. The other thing you can do to help the user is to say, you have already told me you like fruits. So greatest fruit of all time is apple. What is the second fruit you like? You have already told me you like apple, orange. You've already told me you like apple and orange. So that's a way to help them not provide duplicates. And the question was asked about how well ordinal works in Spanish, and I think I can actually demonstrate that pretty quickly. The way you change the language is with an initial block. Set language to Español. Now, I haven't given it any translations. So what is the segundo? Now, actually, this isn't very good because it doesn't respect the gender of the thing it modifies. So I know that somebody in Brazil has worked on a version of ordinal where they actually indicate the gender. And I think I meant to include that in Docassemble proper, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But that's a good question. These translation functions are really tricky.
There was a question from Toby in the chat as well, Jonathan.
Oh, I missed it.
I think Toby, you might want to explain after I give it a go, but I think the question is, when you are writing your question, is there another fruit? Can you refer to the whole list of fruits so you can show progress in the gathering? Is that kind of the idea? Maybe Toby, you want to clarify?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like you just did. It showed us how you could put fruits, and you've already told me you like fruits. But in other situations, if you had another question that referred to fruits, it would require you to gather all of fruits before it was displayed, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess is it like an exception just for questions where you're actually gathering
That is a very good point. I have been glossing over quite a lot of complications. If you're in the middle of gathering a list, normally this is a catch-22 because putting fruits in a context where it gets reduced to text would require the list to be gathered. But I have some special code that figures out that you're in the middle of list gathering, and it only shows you the ones that have been gathered so far. So yeah, you're right that this is kind of doing this is fraught with peril. There's also a way that you can access the items in a list without triggering list gathering, which is by referring to fruits.complete elements. You can do that. But I actually, one of the things that I meant to touch on, which is kind of to your point, is like, why is it even asking about the fruits anyway? Well, the reason it is because I have one mandatory block in my code, and it has references to fruits. So it is implicitly requiring the fruits to be gathered just as a matter of its dependency satisfaction features. Like, in order to know how many elements there are in the fruits list, it needs to finish asking the questions of the user. Otherwise, it would just be 0, you know. Or to do a for loop over the fruits that implicitly requires the list to be gathered.
So does it automatically know that if you have a question about fruits and fruits I and you have a question about there is another, to gather first a fruit and then ask is there another question?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Like,
so it has an attribute, there is a number, right?
Well, there is another attribute is something that comes and goes throughout the list gathering process. So I wouldn't ever refer to it. I would just let Docassemble use that internally.
Okay.
If you wanted to use a good coding practices and have a mandatory code block that powers your interview, and call this a final, I like to say final screen, you can manually trigger the list gathering process by writing in your Python code fruits.gather. So that is a method that will cause the list to be gathered. So that if you wanted to very explicitly ask these questions in a particular place, you could write it this way, and it goes right into gathering them. All right, any other questions? So let's go into more advanced gathering of things, and let's gather a list of objects. So far, we have treated fruits as a list of text strings of text, like the word apple. But you might want to gather more information about somebody's favorite fruit, like how much they like it or something like that. So in order to gather a list of objects, you use the DA list using thing, but you do object type equals some object. If you're gathering a list of people, it would be object type individual. That's a built-in object type in Docassemble. And objects are kind of a advanced thing. I'm not going to go into them in detail in this training. But let's create an object type of thing, which is a very simple Docassemble object. The only inherent property that a thing has is that it has a name, and it uses the attribute name.text for the name. And when you're gathering a list of objects, it's optional, but basically I think everybody should do it. You should write this: complete attribute equals complete. It's kind of a weird thing to say. I probably should have picked something better. But what that is saying is that I want to say that a list is complete when the attribute called complete is defined. And I'll show you what this means when I try to run this interview. Do I like any fruits? Yes, I do. It says there was an error. There was a reference to a variable fruits 0 complete that could not be looked up. So I'm going to define a block that, I'm going to declare a block that defines this. What does it mean for fruits.0 to be complete? And I'm going to change it to be generalized. I'm going to say, well, a fruits item needs to have a name. And I also want to ask, how much does the person like it? How much liked? So I'm declaring what it means for an item in this list to be gathered. When have I gathered all of the attributes of this object that I think are important? And I'm just referencing them because this will trigger questions to be asked when Docassemble encounters those lines in the Python code on its path to finding the definition of fruits.complete. Do I like any fruits? Yes. There was a reference to variable fruits.0.name.text that could not be found. So I need to adapt the question that I wrote before, not to ask about fruits I, but ask about the name of the fruit. So I'm going to change the question here to ask about the name.text attribute, because we're graduating from just strings to complicated Docassemble objects here. What is the greatest fruit of all time? Apple. Now there was an error. It wants to know about fruits, how much liked. So I'll define a question. Actually, I think I'll stick it on. I'll tag it on to this this question as another field. How much do you like it? I'm worried about that question mark. It's going to screw up EML. So the attribute is how much liked. And I think I'll make this a data type. What is the name of that data type that does the slider? I don't even remember my own code. I'll make it an integer.
Is it a range?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, thank you. I think it defaults to something sensible. Oh, you must provide a min and a max. Min from 1 to 10. How much do you like the fruit? Do you like it fruits? Yes. What is the greatest fruit of all time? How much do you like it? Well, I said it's the greatest fruit of all time, so 10. Any more? Oops. Well, I'm confused as heck. I don't want to think about that. So I'm going to make a separate question for this, because I think something weird might be going on with the how much liked thing.
Is it because of your reference to fruits there on line 25? I think it is. It's not complete elements.
26.
Oh, you're right. When it's a little bit different when you.
And you're going to also need to do comma and list around it. It's a little. That would be nice to get a better helper there, but it won't show anything. It'll show an empty bracket with commas in it, without the names. I believe.
Well, let's just see. Like any fruits, what is it? Apple. Yeah, you're right.
Complete elements doesn't return a DA list.
So there is a function called comma and list. And if you give it a list or you give it a bunch of items, it will print them as, first item, comma, second item, and then and. It also does that in different languages.
So the object thing works differently from people, because if you were going to put people in there, you would get the names, right? If you put your DA list for people, but where you put.
No, Caroline, it actually is the same. The difference is what complete elements returns is not a DA list, so it doesn't know how to.
But what I'm saying is, if you didn't put complete elements in, when you just put the list name for people, don't you just get the names like automatically?
And you would for thing as well if it were the full DA list, but not when it's in the middle of being gathered and you use complete elements.
Oh. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This could actually just be a bug on my part.
Say it one more thing. Oh, never mind. I'll watch it again
It's a
later.
bug, so it might not be behave the same way tomorrow.
All right, perfect.
So
Right. So the point is that you use the complete elements if you want to feed back and you haven't finished the list, right? If you haven't got complete attribute, then you need to do the elements.
well, the complete attribute, I just think is a general best practice because it allows you to be very explicit about what things you want to gather. Because without it, it's not going to ask for how much liked.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but what I'm this complete elements thing is, I just learned about it just recently, right? Like in this project. So if complete weren't satisfied, if the complete attribute weren't satisfied, Quentin's saying that's why it was empty, because you hadn't gotten complete attribute yet, right? If you
right.
If you completed
Because he hadn't gotten complete element. He hadn't completed
finished the list.
all the elements. It was asking for all the elements.
Right.
So this is asking just for completed elements. So I don't know why they're completed, but
the confusing thing about gathering a list and also referring to the list at the same time is that when you're in the middle of asking a question,
right,
it's like in this in-between state where the object that you're gathering exists in the interview answers, but its attributes haven't been populated yet. So it's like impossible to display it, but if you check the length of the list, it's there. So it gets really confusing when you're in this in-between state. So the complete elements method, it kind of helps you out there.
Could you use items? Is there an items or just item? Is there a plural items?
There's no like name in that like that in Docassemble, I don't think.
Okay.
There's elements, but
elements. Okay.
But elements is like the internal like Python list behind the object. But anyway, I've said that, but for an item to be complete, we need to know the name and how much it is liked. And it also works if you split it out into multiple questions. So how much do you like fruits I?
You're going to need an indentation.
Sorry, I forgot about that. How much do you like apple? So because I'm being very explicit about what it means for an item to be totally asked about and complete, it is asking multiple questions for each item as it's gathering.
It seems like part of the question is, well, I mean, thing and people are the same, but still classes have some sort of required name. And DA object is sort of the example of one that doesn't. So it's really hard to collect DA objects without complete attributes.
Yeah, that's why I'm just saying, like, always use complete attribute if you're gathering objects. You'll just be happier. Yeah, there are some complications if you don't use it and you're using a generic object. Before our time is up, I wanted to introduce a powerful concept called a table, where you can declare a table that you display on the screen, and let's call it fruits.table. It's just a name I made up. You can pick any name. And I'm going to say the rows of the table are the fruits, and the columns are a YAML list using the traditional YAML method. So I'm going to say the name, and I'm going to refer to a special variable called the row item. So I'm saying that for the name cell of the table will be the whatever the item is, .name.text, and how much liked is row item dot how much liked. I think that's what I called that variable, right? Yeah, how much like. And then on the final screen, I want to display that table. And I'm just going to display it by referring to its variable name, which is defined by table. So you'll understand more when you see what it looks like. Okay, fruits, apple, banana. So it is now formatted a nice little table here with the name and a value. And so I can add as many attributes of an object that I want, and I can add as many columns as I want to this list, at least to the extent that it would be friendly on a mobile device to look at it. But here's the other cool thing you can do besides creating one of these tables, is that you can say in your table definition that you want it to be editable, and under edit, you list out the attributes that you want to be edited when you're editing it. So I'm going to list the attributes that I care about, which are name.txt and how much liked, and save that, and then refresh the screen. So now I have a new column called actions where I can edit information about an item. So if I click edit on apple, it will ask a question that it has already asked. It already knows how to ask about this. What is the greatest fruit of all time? I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to say I actually think the peach is the greatest fruit of all time, and I like it 10. And then when I press continue, it's going to go back to the regular interview logic, and now the table has been updated.
This is almost like a review screen in some ways.
Yeah, pretty much. You can put these on a review screen, or you could put them on a screen that isn't a review screen. So suppose I'm like, banana. I don't care about banana. I'll delete it. So it allows you to show the user at a glance what they have put in. And the other thing you can do is you can give the user the option of adding a new item to the list, say if they forgot about one. And that you use a method called add action. And those buttons are referred to as action buttons. There's a function called action button HTML that returns HTML for a button. And that's the same thing with this expression here. So if I add fruits.add action to the sub question of that final screen, and I reload it, I now have a button called add another. And when I click that, it'll say, what is the second fruit you like? And I'll say pear. So you can do the interactive thing, and then you can let the user see the information in a new way and do stuff with it. So this is pretty powerful. Now, if you can't just go into a Word document and plug in fruits.table, and a Word document, things don't work that way. But if you look at the page of the documentation on documents, you'll see that you can do a Word table. You have to create it in Word first, basically. And this is good because then you can format the Word table however you like.
I think one thing that's kind of cool, someone asked earlier today about the pandas library, and this works with, it's actually a pandas data frame, right? Or at least you can use data frame features with the table, like exporting to Excel for one, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I forgot where that's documented, but I guess it's not here. But yeah, there is an option for writing a table and then giving the user the option to download it in Excel format. I just don't remember where that is in the documentation.
And do other operations that you would do in pandas as well, like graphing and so on.
So any questions about gathering items?
John, will you post this YAML somewhere, maybe in Slack?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, I'll post it in the Docacon channel of Slack when we're done. Now, one of the cool things you can do with this, once you have a complete attribute, is you can have conditional things. Like if fruits i.name.text is apple, then ask an additional question, fruits.i dot variety. And then you can have a question that asks, what variety of apple? So if I say, do I like any fruits? Apple. How much? 5. What variety? Fuji. But if I say I like banana, it'll ask me how much I like it, but it's not going to ask me about a variety. And the other cool thing is that even in this edit list down here, you can make sure that you follow up with variety. If somebody edits a question. So so if I were to edit, say I deleted apple and then I edited banana and I changed this to apple, it'll say how much, and then it'll know to follow up to say what variety. But the problem with this is that it's going to think that you want to ask about the variety of a banana or a variety of a peach, but you can avoid that by going up to your question that asks about the variety of fruit and tag it with a conditional saying never ask this question if fruits.i.name.text is something other than an apple. So this is kind of inconvenient in that you have to sort of express this logic in more than one place. And I wish there was a way I could do this better. But that will ensure that the interview makes sense, and that when you say that you like a banana and then you go to edit it, it's not going to, oh, it does ask about variety of apple. I must have made a, oh no, I only want to ask this if it does equal apple. I got my logic mixed up there. So now, yeah, and it doesn't ask about the variety for the banana. So even with these editing tools, you can maintain your sort of inherent logic about the questions that you want asked. Any questions?
Did you, I'm sorry, I had to answer some other question. Did you talk about why would you pick review screens over this? Why would you pick review screens versus this editing tool in a table?
Well, a review screen is something I covered in the advanced training. It is a screen that you can define that might ask between 0 and 20 questions. And you can display it at any point in your interview, and it will only ask questions about answers that have already been provided. So it's kind of like this multi-purpose screen.
So it's a little bit more dynamic. I mean,
yeah, it's dynamic, and you can, and it has edit buttons where you can go back to questions that.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
It provides some navigation so that people can see their answers in a place. But I think you can, if you have a list, the best way to let it be editable is to add is to use a table, because I think users like seeing it in that format. But there's one thing to be wary of. If you're using a regular review screen, the table itself will be an undefined variable until you define it. So if you just put fruits.table into a review screen, it might be hidden because it thinks, oh, you're referring to an undefined variable. It's something I haven't gotten to yet. And you can get around that by always doing in your mandatory code block. Where is mandatory? Yeah, after you gather the list, just make a reference to the table, and that will define the table as a variable. So it's kind of a technical thing, but that should help you out if you're using review screens and tables. Any other questions? Do you feel ready to go use list gathering in your interviews?
Jonathan, I think it's really cool the way you you use your error messages to build your code. So you just copy that and then you think,
Yeah.
oh, it's missing. You want this? Okay, here, have it.
Right.
That's a good. I think that's a great teaching tool, and shows how useful those error messages are. I really like the way that you've, communicated this.
Error messages are not always that helpful, unfortunately,
No.
especially if they come out of like Python. But anyway, thanks everybody for coming to this training. The attendance was more than I thought it would be. I recognize, I don't know how to pronounce your first name, Maeve McGlinchey. I think I've seen you on Twitter.
Yeah, Maeve.
Are you in the UK? Or?
South Africa, Cape Town.
South Africa. Oh my gosh, that's great.
That's the easy, Maeve. Tell him that's the easy pronunciation for your name.
I'm half Irish, so it's usually written in Irish, which is a little bit more difficult. But yeah, it's great. This was a really great session. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for coming. Is David asks, is there a way for creators to have access to the answers to the questions? Yeah, you can push stuff into Google Sheet if you want. Why don't you ask me that on Slack? I can tell you more about that. All right. Well, thanks everybody. If you're up for it, we are having a happy hour at 4. No presentations, just like chilling and hanging out. We've had one every other year, although it actually involved going to a bar, so it was a little bit. It had better food and drink, but anyway, you can bring your own. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.